Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio. Today we're revisiting the Zodiac Killer, one of the things that I right now can't seem to get away from on this channel. We've covered a few other cases recently. Billy Joe Jenkins, got back to the disappearance of Joan Risch, but right now we've been talking about the Zodiac Killer quite a lot. Today's suspect we're looking at is Ross Sullivan, somebody that I have entertained the possibility of. For example, I said that I was not going to cover the case of Jack Torrance because I didn't believe anything in it was sufficient enough to go through. And normally, on this channel, I should say that I often just say what I genuinely believe. Whereas some other true crime channels, maybe you can think of one, that they give you like for and against. They just give you the information, and they want you to decide. They kind of withhold their sort of what their theory is. Most of what I do is theorizing, but today, I'm going to tell you flat out, with the case of Ross Sullivan, I can't do that. I'm just going to go over some very basic Ross Sullivan information, and I would hope that someone who's been following the Zodiac case will be able to connect some dots. Because there's some things that I'm wrestling with when we're talking about Ross Sullivan. Okay, let's talk about some of the things that incriminate Ross Sullivan as the Zodiac Killer. This is heavily connected to the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. And I was even looking at one website that was referring to Sherry Jo Bates as a Zodiac murder. But, we're in Riverside. This is the RCC, the Riverside Community College, and it involves so many things. For starters, if Ross Sullivan is the Zodiac Killer, then that means that Sherry Jo Bates is definitely involved. How do we get there? Ross Sullivan was someone who had some mental issues, trying to be as polite as possible. At first, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Then he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was in and out of mental institutions. He spent at least 3 years in a mental institution during his time. His time at RCC was interrupted because he spent 3 years in a mental hospital. But, no one's hating on him for that. That's just kind of what happened. Some of the things, though, that incriminate him in Sherry Jo Bates is Ross Sullivan almost always wore military boots. He was never in the army, but he almost always wore the military boots, and he wore a military-style jacket, and there was a military-style boot print found near the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. Also, we have a very similar military-style boot print found near one of the Zodiac murder victims. And we brought this up in the case of Louis Myers, just about how for the longest time people were looking for someone ex-military, someone like a soldier. Louis Myers worked in a military surplus store. Ross Sullivan just wore military boots because it was his choice. So we have this huge history of mental issues, and we have the military boots. Furthermore, let's talk about the sketch. Ross Sullivan matches the sketch very closely. He has the widow's peak. He has the cheekbones. He looks very, very similar. Moreover, Ross Sullivan was very involved with cryptography. In one place they say cryptology, in one place they say cryptography. He took at least one class on codes and writing codes. So, we got the Zodiac ciphers. That's again pointing in his direction. And I was just reading an article recently that Ross had been involved in a student film about murder. And while that is very, very assumptive, it's still, though, there it is, it's he was the lead actor in a student film where he played a murderer. So, we have a lot of circumstantial things coming together, not to mention handwriting. Comparisons of the Ross Sullivan's handwriting with the Zodiac handwriting, people are saying that it's very similar. Now let's talk about some of the things that would go against Ross Sullivan being the Zodiac Killer. Well, one of the big things about this is, I haven't exactly found the exact dimensions of Ross's body, but like what they're saying is Ross Sullivan was obese. You can't really see it in his photos because most of his photos are like from the shoulders up. He doesn't look very overweight in his face, but one person writes Ross Sullivan's weight was between 260 and 300 pounds. And one of the big things about this is I'm going to be honest with you guys. A lot of the things that I see that get really, really specific about Ross Sullivan are coming to you from forums. There are people who haven't even cited their sources. It's just people commenting on forums. I really hope that everything I put out is accurate, but I'm just going to let you know where I found this stuff. These are just people commenting on forums, but that is where they're giving all the specific information. They're like, Ross Sullivan was somewhere between 260 to 300 pounds. And I've heard multiple people talk about that. Multiple people have said that this guy was very overweight. How likely is it that he would be committing the murders like the Zodiac? And also, we don't really have any overweight descriptions of the Zodiac killer. I don't believe anyone has said, that he is someone who was over 300 pounds. And no, not Ross wouldn't have been. He would be somewhere between 260 and 300. Another big thing that would be against Ross Sullivan. As far as we know, again, people commenting, Ross Sullivan did not drive. And we think that the Zodiac killer most definitely drove a car, knew how to drive. If that is true, that's very likely. That's a very big thing against Ross, because it's like, well, we can say with very, very high chance the Zodiac could drive a car, if you know what I'm talking about, because of everything. It's like, it's not just any single incident. Almost all of them are connected to some sort of transportation, except for maybe the taxi driver. Now, what are some other things that we can say, though, about this? Ross is in the Riverside Library around the time of Sherry Jo Bates. We know that Ross's brother had introduced him to Sherry Jo Bates. They were acquaintances. They had met at least once or twice. People have reported this. Ross's own brother believed that he was the Zodiac killer. And one of the big things that I was talking about with somebody, years ago, when I was just like, what if, they never found the Zodiac because the Zodiac died in 1977? That would really push people away from... Well, that's why they never found the Zodiac. He died in 1977, and that's when all the activity would cease and just the police's trail went cold. Ross's, of course, yes, and I'm talking about Ross. He died in 1977, I believe, of natural causes. When I say natural causes, he had all kinds of medical issues. It's not just bipolar, not just schizophrenia. He died of another particular syndrome with a very abnormal name that I can't recall. And Ross Sullivan isn't a suspect that I've, investigated very, very thoroughly. But what I would say that really stands out to me is, for starters, like most people, he has a very close match to the sketch. He's in the Riverside area at the time of Sherry Jo Bates. He did move north after that murder happened to the San Francisco Bay Area. And he's definitely in the area for the time of the Zodiac killings. And what people believe is that Ross was institutionalized from 1971 to 73. They believe that. I've never seen any definitive citing on that. We definitely know during his 3-year hospitalization from, 61 to 64? People have the exact dates on that. They obtained, the Riverside hospital records, and it's... it's like November 1st of 61 to February 2nd of 64, something like that. We have definitive certainty of that. So it's very speculative, but they speculate that he was hospitalized from 71 to 73. So that explains the lack of Zodiac activity at the time. Somebody said that there was a Zodiac letter mailed in 1978, 1 year after the death of Ross Sullivan, and I tried to find a confirming source for that. I could not. So, as I said, I can't argue that I believe Ross Sullivan is the Zodiac, or that he is even likely. I am so conflicted. I just kind of gave you everything that I've uncovered. I first found out about Ross Sullivan because of a fan video. Oh, did I say a fan video? A YouTuber. I mean, no, the guy's not a fan of Ross Sullivan. It's like, somebody presented their Ross Sullivan theory in a fan video. It's before I saw anything from the History Channel and anything like that. But they promoted, this particular theory in a way. And they also were even insinuating that the Zodiac symbol has a cross in it. It has a cross because its name is Ross. And I was like, that's your theory? Oh, for bleeding Christ, I was just like, oh, yeah, but someone was actually putting it out there, and I think they might have just been trying to be humorous, but at the same time, they were like, there it is. The real reasons why I have conflicts with this one is, it's like the Richard Gaikowski theory when so many things seem to line up. But then it just feels like you don't quite have the smoking gun. I mean, Ross had mental issues, he had studied cryptography, he had a connection to Sherry Jo Bates, and one person brought up, and one person is kind of addressing an elephant in the room when they're like, Ross Sullivan should be the prime suspect in the Sherry Jo Bates murder. People really explained at Riverside that Ross Sullivan was very awkward, that he made people uncomfortable, and a lot of people felt uneasy around him, and they thought that he had a very bizarre aura. Not to mention that Ross bragged about being hospitalized for 3 years. This wasn't like a dark secret. From what I understand, he talked very openly about it, and it was like, does that make him a murderer, though? Does that mean he murdered Sherry Jo Bates? Well, we do have the military boot. We do have his personal connection. We do have, they're both in the library at the same time. The last place that Sherry Jo Bates was seen was the library, and Ross was like an assistant there. Of some sorts, I mean, the reason why I'm so conflicted is I don't see a smoking gun. I don't see the definitive 100% connection. I mean, from at least multiple cases, we know that the Zodiac knew how to drive, right? So, if it is true that Ross Sullivan couldn't drive a car, and he never learned how to drive a car, would that even rule him out? And somebody was like, well, what if he just had somebody driving the car for him? Now we're back to what I just said about Arthur Lee Allen. What if he had a partner? Well, with Ross Sullivan's instance, I think that might be pushing it. I think just to say that, he had his driver, he had a chauffeur drive him to the Zodiac murders. Hey, it's 3:45. Hello, Brian. Would you like to go out and murder someone tonight? I mean, I don't know about that. I really don't know. I mean, I think that's sort of like trying to compound a theory to make it a little too complicated. And that's exactly what somebody said about Ross Sullivan on the very first video that I ever saw about him. Like, one of the top comments was just, you are trying to force this. There are a lot of things that point to the case of Ross Sullivan that really would make somebody feel that he is the Zodiac. And I know I'm being very general, and maybe I'm rambling, but what do you think? I've given sort of a kind of messy presentation on the case of Ross Sullivan, but do you think that there is any chance at all that Ross Sullivan was the Zodiac killer? Or is this just somebody who had some very unfortunate mental health issues, who is just sort of in the wrong place at the wrong time, who, just dealt with some very big, troubling issues in his life, and he just happened to live in the same area? What do you think? If you have any comments at all, please drop a comment below, and I will talk to you guys next time.